So good morning, everyone. My name is James Oliver. I was able to participate in the Respect Big Bend effort, the Mitchell Foundation funded effort in the Trans-Pecos region, as a representative of Texas Agricultural Land Trust on their steering committee. And you've already seen some of the things that came out of that, mainly the mapping tool. Our first panelist, Alex Hettena, I'll finish introducing, is a GIS specialist at Borderlands Research Institute. She came to BRI for the opportunity to work on the spatial database that is part of that mapping tool. Our next guest is Dennis McBeth. Although he grew up in the ranching community, he has spent his professional life in mineral production, primarily on the drilling and production side. Since leaving that life, I'm not going to say he retired. Listening to him last night, he hadn't slowed down any. He's returned to his ranching roots and writes a weekly column, Oil About Ranching, for the Livestock Weekly. Collin Shackelford, seventh generation Texan. Family's originally from Real County, Texas. He has a master's in rangeland ecology from Texas A&M. He spent many years as a fire expert using fire for ecological restoration. He spent 5 years with the Nature Conservancy on a forest project in the Davis Mountains. And he spent the last 5 years with Texas, 11 years, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
11 years with West Texas Native Seeds Project. And where's Joseph?
Chase.
Yeah, Joseph was going to introduce Chase.
Okay. He disappeared.
He was sitting right there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So really what this panel represents is a chronology of the development process, quite frankly. Alex will talk about kind of the tool that you can use for pre-planning that Dr. Harvison and Dr. Young and Dr. Kiesecker all discussed. Dennis really has a lot of experience on the production side on the ground. Chase will talk about from the land and mineral owner's perspective, and then Collin will talk about his work and kind of the final aspect of that. So, Alex.
Thank you, James. Can y'all hear me okay with a mic like this? Okay. Appreciate the introduction, James. I'm Collin Shackelford. I'm with the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute, which is part of Texas A&M Kingsville. I'm one of 6 different regional directors for a statewide project called Texas Native Seeds. I'm based out of Alpine. I cover our West Texas region, and we collaborate with a lot of different folks in the different regions we work with. In West Texas here, we're working with a lot of the folks from Borderlands Research Institute. I'm just going to talk briefly about our project, what it is we do, and then touch on components of a replanting, revegetation project, basically kind of setting the stage for successful restoration planning and some of the decisions you can make as a planning manager, as a landowner, as an energy operator to kind of set yourself up for success later down the road with the revegetation work. Well, first, kind of what is West Texas Native Seeds? Our project has 3 different missions. Basically, we work to develop native seed sources, a seed product. We develop those seed sources in each of the different regions that we work with across the state. Those seed sources come from regional populations within that area and are adapted to that region there, so you expect better performance with local seed sources there. We take that seed product, we work with the commercial seed trade, we license those products to them. The commercial seed trade produces them at scale and then gets them out to end users, consumers, people doing revegetation projects across West Texas. And then we do research. We take those seed products, we work with them, different seed mixes, different types of soils, looking at cover crops, things of that sort, how to put together a best revegetation project, developing best practices, and developing best restoration strategies. So basically, we're developing a seed product, getting it out to market, and then we mess around with it to figure out how to best use it and then convey it out to end users in events like this and one-on-one consultation, things of that sort. We are a statewide program. We have 6 different project regions you can see there on the map. I cover West Texas. I also do some work in the Panhandle region. We're beginning to do some work collaborating with Texas Tech up in Lubbock there. And again, we work with a lot of different collaborators all across the state. So on to kind of a planning and thinking about planting and planning that. What matters most for a successful planting? There are a lot of variables in the planting that we have absolutely no control over. We can't make it rain. We can't make it cool off. We can't make it not freeze, so our small seedlings freeze and we get some mortality events from that. What we can do is we can focus on the choices where we can make decisions, control the aspects of that planting, and try to set things up for success. Basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the best choices and prepare the land for when it eventually does rain. One of those choices is in seed selection. What we're trying to do is we're trying to put the right seed in the right place. Looking at these 2 examples here, these are the same species, blue grama, 2 different varieties of plants, and as you can see, 2 radically different levels of performance. These plants were planted at the same time in our research farm in Alpine. Same soils, same rainfall, same irrigation, same climatic conditions, radically different looking plants. And that has to do with the seed variety and the seed origin. The top plant is Bad River Blue Grama, which is a seed release developed by the NRCS in South Dakota. South Dakota genetics, adapted to South Dakota soils and climates. Planted in West Texas, it's a little confused. It's doing the best it can. Little buddy's really trying there, but there's just not a lot happening there. And this plant has not had any kind of herbivory on it or anything. This is just the best this plant could do. It looks like a little topiary ball there. Bottom picture, Hettena Blue Grama, an older release developed by the NRCS out of New Mexico, Chihuahuan Desert origin, used to West Texas soils, West Texas climate, bring it on. I can handle it, I can grow, you're gonna get better performance there. This is an extreme example of variation in plant performance there. You know, the geography is pretty extreme. There's a big difference in South Dakota and Texas, but it illustrates the point. The more local your plant source is, the tendency is you get better performance for that area than you do if you have a seed source that comes from a different geography, a different ecosystem, totally different arena in which you're operating right now. So the things you can control, right seed in the right place. We're talking about seed varieties as an example of that previous slide. Not all seeds are created equal, as we saw. A grass seed is not just a grass seed, and any old grass seed will do. Let's take the example of side oats grama. Nationwide, there's about 15 different releases that are available commercially. Of those 15 different varieties, 3 of those came from Texas. Of those 3 that are developed in Texas, only 1 of them came from West Texas and is adapted to West Texas, the Trans-Pecos growing conditions. It's a plant we developed called Brewster germplasm side oats grama, commercially available out there. It is what is called an ecotypic seed. It came from West Texas. The genetics are adapted to that climate, to those soils. You're going to get better performance. So if you're making seed selections, you need to think about utilizing ecotypic seed, locally adapted seed, the best you can. So we're making choices about seed varieties, and then we're putting those seeds together into a seed mix. So we want to do with that mix is we want to match the plants to the soils. Sometimes we're planting in deep sand, sometimes we're planting in tight clays, sometimes we're planting in saline soils. We want to pick the right seed mix, the right species of plants, and the right seed varieties that's going to work on that particular soil type. We're also planting in different sites. Sometimes we might be planting in a deep bottomland, maybe on slopes, maybe on tops. We might be planting in shallow clays with a hard bottom. We might be planting in deep clays. We're trying to match our selection of plants to those sites, to those soils. And then we want to match the seed quantities, the proportion of those plants within a seed mix there. You want to have a lot of diversity in that seed mix. You want to have a lot of early successional species in that seed mix for better success. Not everybody's a plant community ecologist. Seed varieties, seed mixes are unfamiliar to a lot of people. That's an item that we can help you with to make those choices. Reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you with seed mix selection, seed varieties. And the last thing that we control that I have time to talk about is the planting method and the timing of that planting. Here in the Permian, with the research that we've done to date, we have gotten better plant emergence with a spring planting rather than a fall planting. It's a limited data set, so there's kind of a caveat. We need to do a little bit more research, but the tendency is we get better performance with spring plantings. What's absolutely very clear from the research we've been doing is the implement you use to plant your seeds. You want to use a no-till native seed drill. That is an implement that is designed to place the seed into the soil. You get good seed-soil contact. That implement covers that seed up, so you're not getting it blown around by wind. You're not getting a lot of seed predation by ants or birds. There, we have significantly better results using a no-till native seed drill than you doing a traditional kind of broadcasting seed with like a fertilizer spreader where you mix your seed with like sand or cracked corn as a medium to distribute it. It was night and day in the amount of plant emergence we had using a no-till native seed drill. Back to making choices about seed varieties, seed mixes. We do have an online resource that's available for folks. You can just pull this up on your own. If you just Google Texas native seeds, you'll pull up our website. On the home page on the left, there's a whole list of links. I don't know if you can see where that little blue circle is. It says seed mix map. If you click that, you'll pull up a map of the state of Texas. You click on a region, and then from that region level, you click on the county that you're operating in. Some of them will have different ecoregions. You click on the appropriate ecoregion. That will pull up two different seed mixes. One is a seed mix for a sandy soil. One is a seed mix for a clay soil. You can download that as a PDF. You can send it to any of the seed growers we work with, and you can just say, I want this mix, and they can put it together based on their inventory, things of that sort. It's a boilerplate mix, but it will work for most sites. If you really want to try to tailor your seed mix to your site, feel free to give us a call. I'd be happy to help with that. That's what we do, is one-on-one consultation with landowners, energy operators, developing seed mixes that are appropriate for your site. Now let's kind of look at seed varieties, seed choices in action. This is a pipeline right-of-way research project that we did in South Texas. This is in Live Oak County. Basically, we kind of split that right-of-way in half. On one side of it, we used ecotypic seed from our project in South Texas natives, used a native seed drill to plant it, and then the contractor was the contractor that the pipeline company had just been using for years. We told them, just go do what you normally do, use your regular old seed mix, plant it the way you normally do. 4 months after the project was planted, we got radically different results. On the left-hand side, good grass cover, all native ecotypic seed species. 4 months later, got a little bit of rain, looks fantastic. 2 years later, that pattern holds true. Still have good grass cover on the left, minimal grass cover on the right. You do see some additional species kind of popped up there. That's not from the planting that the contractor did, that's from seed rain from our adjacent planting there. And that was on the lee side of the right-of-way. If we were on the windward side, there probably would have been a whole lot more seeds on there. Looking at a project that we did with Enterprise, is the Chinook Pipeline, big pipeline project going from Pecos to Houston, about 8,000 acres of planting on it. We developed about 13 different seed mixes for this project. Again, matching the seeds, matching the mix to the site, to the soils there. For 2019, these are the results we got. On the left is the area that Enterprise planted from our consulted seed mix. On the right, just fortuitously, they had put in another pipeline right-of-way at about the same time, and they planted it about 10 days after the Enterprise contractor came through and planted our seed mix. You have good native grass cover on the left, you have minimal grass cover on the right, you have a lot of broomweed there. Some of that has to do with some of the cover crop choices that we made there. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about cover crops, but that can be an important component of your seeding project. Feel free to give me a call, we can talk about that. 1 year later, 2020, good native grass cover. And then that split again, the enterprise right away on the left, the other operator on the right, some grass cover, but you have a tremendous amount of broomweed. Broomweed's an alleliopathic plant. It suppresses a lot of grass emergence in there. So radically different performance based on seed mix, because those were planted about 10 days apart. Same soils, same climate, same rainfall. This is a project that Conoco put in on their quail ranch. This is the Gray Oak pipeline. This is a picture from 2021. I was talking to Jesse Woods from Conoco about this. They planted that 2 years prior. That seed sat there for 2 years until the rainfall came. So what we're doing, again, setting the stage, preparing the land for when it's eventually going to rain. Same picture, 2021. 8 months ago, we had a site in South Texas look just like this. It was a big frac operation. You know, it wasn't this frac operation. It's just a picture I pulled off the internet. But everybody knows what a frac operation looks like. Large pad site, a lot of heavy equipment, a lot of people moving back and forth. 8 months after they finished their frac operation, they pulled out, and this is what it looks like today. They pulled back all that caliche. They did the right kind of site prep for it. They made the right choices with seed varieties and seed mix in their planting methodology, and they got really good, healthy native grass on there. And again, it's the key to this is controlling what you can and then hoping you get some rainfall. So you can have some impact on these things with the selections that you make on what goes into that type of planting. So this is just a quick list of the different partners we work with in our West Texas project. We consult and work with a lot of the folks from ConocoPhillips there. We've just started a new research project with ExxonMobil and XTO. We consult with Pioneer Resources on developing seed mixes for a lot of their projects. Consider us a resource. We're happy to help. We can do one-on-one consultations with folks. That's part of our mandate. That's what we do. So feel free to give me a call, get in contact. I can help you make those choices and point you in the right direction with seed growers that we work with and kind of set you on your way to hopefully what's going to be a successful restoration planting. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Billy. I'm Joseph Fitzsimmons. I'm not on your agenda. I just asked Melinda, an old friend who I've worked with on this project, Respect Big Bend, for a while, if I could introduce the next speaker, Dr. Chase Currie. I've known Chase for a while. He is a remarkable young man. He is the general manager of our family's ranch, the San Pedro Ranch, which we've owned and operated for 90 years. And he has some unique experience on reclamation and restoration and balancing conservation with energy development. Because as was mentioned, the minerals and the surface are not owned together on the San Pedro, so we have to accommodate that energy development. We also have a conservation easement on that ranch, and he has managed to make the conservation and the energy development mitigate those impacts to the point that, thanks to his work, we received the Aldo Leopold Conservation Award for 2021. And so I want you to pay attention to what this young man has to say. He is not your average PhD because he actually does what most PhDs talk about or write about. He does it on the ground. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Chase Currie, Dr. Chase Currie.
Well, JoJo, that's what I refer to Mr. Fitzsimmons as. We're going to move forward here. I appreciate the introduction there. It's been a privilege and a blessing to be there at the San Pedro for going on 10 years now. So we've had plenty of successes, but we've also had a lot of failures, and we've learned from those mistakes along the way. So I hope today that I can illustrate to you all what we've done and talk a little bit about how we can manage oil and gas development on the surface so that we minimize its footprint. And I think I'm not going to get into a lot of specifics here. The main thing I want to focus on is illustrating to you all there are some underlying principles, if you will, whether you are in North Dakota, Pennsylvania, South Texas, the Permian Basin, that hold true, that can help you minimize the footprint from oil and gas development. So first off, let's talk a little bit about what are the impacts of energy development, or some of the obvious impacts, if you will. So habitat fragmentation, obviously, there's the loss of suitable habitat, and then also the risk of the encroachment of invasive plant species. So let's talk a little bit about the fundamentals and kind of what we've done to manage development. Well, first and foremost, and the older gentleman earlier mentioned this, having a surface use agreement, I like how he referred to that as having teeth, if you will. So you need a very good, sound surface use agreement that will serve as your backbone, if you will, with your negotiating power between the landowner and the operator. Develop a baseline survey, and what I mean by that is, and this is not only beneficial from the standpoint of managing oil and gas development, but it's also good from the standpoint of just managing your ranch. And so develop a baseline survey, and what I mean by that is understand the different soil types. How do these soil types respond to disturbance? Some respond differently to disturbance. Ecological sites, do you have sensitive areas on the ranch that you want to clear free of in regards to disturbance? And so what we have found, and one of the easiest ways to mitigate or manage development, and as Dr. Harvison mentioned earlier, this happens very quickly. These oil companies can come and guns blazing, so to speak, and things can happen rapidly. And so what we've done is we've tried to manage this and mitigate this in phases. One, the planning phase, which Dr. Harvison mentioned this earlier, is arguably the most important. The construction phase, which is when everything is actually happening. And then the reclamation phase. So when the oil companies are done, what can we do to maximize or enhance our reclamation efforts? And then lastly, how can we use oil and gas development to our advantage? In other words, can we use it to create or enhance existing habitat? Before I get into this, I just wanted to talk about horizontal drilling and the advantages of horizontal drilling from a landowner's perspective. So using this photo as an example, this is a large tract of undisturbed land, if you will. However, this land has actually been explored or drained in oilfield terms already. So the advantages of horizontal drilling is you can have a 6-well pad, and those 6 wells or those laterals can actually go underneath 5, 7, 8,000 feet underneath some of these sensitive habitat types and effectively drain that acreage. However, they don't disturb, you don't disturb the surface. And so that's one of the biggest advantages that we, in my opinion, with technology in the oil field is the use of horizontal drilling. So we talked about breaking development up into phases so that it's easier to manage. Well, in our opinion, the planning phase is the most important. You can't plan after development has occurred. So it's important to get in front of these oil companies and have a plan in place before development begins. Use of spatial mapping, to your advantage. And this is a good way to take a 30,000 feet approach, if you will, to see the big picture. Define existing roads, existing ranch infrastructure, and even existing oil field infrastructure, and think about how you can use that in the future for development. Define oil field corridors, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. And then lastly, visually screening. How can how can you visually screen the development across the landscape so that it's still aesthetically pleasing. This is an example here of spatial mapping. With the advent of GIS technology, there's really nothing you can't do. And this is a very good way to take a 30,000-foot approach of your property to better understand, sensitive habitat types, riparian zones. Are there certain areas of the ranch you don't want to disturb? Secondly, existing roads. So if you think about it from the standpoint of habitat fragmentation, whether it's a 2-track ranch road or a caliche road, that road has fragmented that habitat to some extent. So in the planning phase, think about how you can use existing roads to access these new drilling locations or these new central production facilities. And then also what we've tried to do is we've tried to position new flow line right-of-ways or pipeline right-of-ways along these existing roads. This is an example here of an aerial shot. The photo on your left is prior to the installation of a 3-well horizontal drilling pad. The photo on the right is after that pad was constructed. And what we did here is we really took a look at the existing ranch infrastructure, but then we also took a look at the existing oil field structure. And actually the photo on the left there in the top right, that's an old vertical well. So we were able to use part of that old vertical well as part of that new pad. And then we just positioned the flow line right away along that existing ranch road. So the goal here was to minimize the impact of that new location on the ground. Probably one of the biggest things that I feel like we did from a planning standpoint was develop an oil field corridor. And what I mean by that is identify areas on your property where you can consolidate development. And not only is this beneficial to the landowner, but it also is beneficial to the operators because it's more economic for them because they have their infrastructure consolidated in a smaller area. Sorry, I got my hands got ahead of me there. So lastly, from a planning standpoint is visual screening. So how can you visually screen this disturbance across the landscape? And there's ways to do that with the topography or the lay of the land in regards to where you position these locations. But if you can't do that, there's also ways to do that shown in this next photo here. Same facilities, and what we did was we just simply we picked a color that was more aesthetically pleasing across the landscape to help these facilities blend in to the landscape. So the next phase, the mitigation to help mitigate this development is the construction phase, and this is the phase when the locations are actually being built, the pipeline or flow lines are actually being installed. So this is kind of the meat of the construction here. Arguably the most important step in all of this is segregating the topsoil from the subsoil during the construction. And what I mean by that is taking the topsoil, moving it to one side of the location, moving it to one side of the pipeline right away so that during the construction that topsoil doesn't get contaminated. And I'll show a photo of that here in a minute. Secondly, if you have the opportunity to do so, the use of geotextile drilling mats or wooden drilling mats, in our case, the problem with bringing in a base material, and what I mean by that is caliche, gravel, or whatnot, even if you do move the topsoil over, you're still contaminating that subsoil, changing the pH of that subsoil and so forth. And so if there's any way to get away from that and you can use geotextile mats, we found that the reclamation can be very successful following the use of those geotextile mats. Require clean equipment. I know this seems like a very small step here, but you have no idea where that equipment came from. It could have came from in-state or out of state. So you're increasing the risk of the introduction of invasive plant species by not having clean equipment. And then lastly, bore through sensitive areas, and I'll elaborate on that here briefly. So this is just a very simple example of topsoil that is being stockpiled to one side of this pipeline right away. The idea here is get the topsoil out of the way, essentially install the pipeline, and then once the pipeline has been installed, construction is over, the topsoil can then be moved and put back in place. This just simply, excuse me, decreases the risk of contaminating the topsoil. So this is just a before photo of the use of geotextile mats. In our case, it was actually wooden mats, but you can see the well heads there and kind of the far right side of the screen. This is after the wells have been completed, they were online, and then essentially we picked up those wooden drilling mats and reclaimed the location, and as a result got a beautiful stand of native grasses following that. I mentioned bore through sensitive areas, and in its simplest form, what I mean by that is boring allows you to go, from a pipeline or a flow line standpoint, it allows you to go underneath the surface. So in this particular case, we had a little small riparian zone along this flow line right away. We didn't want to disturb that area because of its sensitivity, and so we actually required the operator to bore underneath the surface without disturbing it. And this is just kind of a follow-up once that pipeline right away was reclaimed. Okay, so the last phase here, the reclamation phase. So this is after everything has been completed, the wells are online, the pipelines have been installed, what next? So the first and foremost is once all the equipment has been removed, redistribute the topsoil, reshape that location back to the lay of the land. Seedbed preparation, Collin talked about this briefly, is very important, and he would be the expert here, but you don't want the soil too fluffy, you don't want it too hard. There's kind of a happy medium there. Use a diverse seed mix, and to Collin's point earlier, I think arguably the most important thing is to make sure you have seeds that are ecotypic to your region, and Collin elaborated on that. Lastly, the use of erosion mats to help retard erosion, you know, in areas where there is a slope. And then lastly, monitoring. You know, I mentioned when I started this presentation, we've had some successes, but we've also had a lot of failures, and those failures have helped us. And the only reason we've been able to do that is through monitoring. So this is just kind of a quick example here of using this location. This was a 5-well, 3-acre horizontal drilling location. Location had been downsized, shaped back to the lay of the land. We installed, it had been seeded, then we installed these erosion mats on this slope, and as a result, got a very nice stand of native grasses following that, that reclamation. This is just a quick example of monitoring. A lot of us don't have the time to go out, run vegetation transects, collect data via Daubenmeier frames and things of that nature. So we use photo points exclusively for all our monitoring. It's fast, it's easy. You know, the old saying, a photo is worth 1,000 words. And so this allows us to see and monitor our reclamation efforts. And I'll kind of close out here with, I had a mentor of mine tell me this years ago, I was frustrated with some of our reclamation, and this is a photo of February 25th, 2015 on a downsized drilling location. This location was actually planted in the fall. You can see the no-till drill lines of those little native grass seedlings that had germinated. And this location actually did not reclaim itself until July 4th of 2017. So my point here is, don't get frustrated with reclamation. These native seeds are very fickle. It takes time. All the stars seem to have to align perfectly. So like going back to what my mentor told me, he said reclamation is a process, it's not a project. And lastly, I'll kind of close out here with, you know, using oil and gas development to your advantage. So what do I mean by that? How can you use that? How can you plan for this to create or enhance habitat? So this is an example, August 24, 2015, of an old caliche pit that was excavated as a result of oil and gas development. And so we took this from arguably the least productive habitat on the ranch and actually reclaimed it into some of now the most productive habitat on the ranch. So this is an example of how you can use oil and gas development to your advantage to create more suitable habitat. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next presenter. Thank you.
The PowerPoint is way above my pay grade. I've been sitting here listening to these other folks this morning, been very interesting. The big mystery to me is how I went from being the youngest and the least experienced person around to being the oldest with too much experience, and most of that being bad experience. 9 years ago, I began writing a column for the Livestock Weekly, which is published in San Angelo, Texas. It has subscribers in all 50 states. If you're a subscriber, thank you. If not, it's livestockweekly.com. The title of the column is Oil About Ranching, and that's as Texan as it sounds. And I want to stress, I am not a journalist. I'm a highly opinionated and biased columnist. I've had a lot of experience. As I said, a lot of it bad. The groundwork for this column was laid over many years. It started when I worked for Big Oil, that's Big Oil being Exxon. I became something of an interpreter because they would ask questions of, you know, what's going on? Why are these farmers and ranchers doing this or that or something? You know, what does this mean? And the flip side of that was my friends in farming and ranching would ask me things about the oil and gas industry, how things worked. And so it kind of precipitated over the years. I grew up in a small farming and ranching operation, and I now live on property which has been in my family for more than 100 years. I'm a landowner and a royalty owner with a small amount of production. That's just enough production for me to assure you that a royalty check is the best cattle supplement known. All I ever wanted to do was be involved in the livestock business. In 1973, I received a degree in agriculture, business, and economics from West Texas State University. In 1978, I went to work for Exxon Company. Many people ask why I was working in the oil field with a degree in ag economics, and I say that's where the economics kicked in. I was not the first broke cowboy to go to work in the oil field, but I never sold my saddle. I hope I don't have to explain that in a place named the Horseshoe Arena. I was told to always have some notes. I'm not a polished speaker, I don't do this a lot, but I was told to have some notes so I could stay focused, and most of all, that I would know when I'm through, so I'd quit. But while I was at Exxon, I spent 8 years in the drilling department as a drilling supervisor or a company man as an on-site supervisor for drilling rigs. While there, I participated drilling wells in 7 different states. Along the way, I always maintained an interest in the livestock business and was never without a horse. So it can accurately be stated that I spent many years with my feet on both sides of the fence. And I hope that with what the good mayor said this morning in his introduction, I hope that I fall right there in that radical middle that he was talking about with my feet on both sides of the fence. And I may be the only drilling supervisor who has also served on a soil conservation board for his county. I'm also a member of the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, which is the only entity in the nation with its own privately funded law enforcement agency. When the opportunity popped up in 2013 for me to write a column for Livestock Weekly, I was very busy working as a drilling consultant, and I did not have time, but I realized that opportunity does not always fit a person's schedule, and that most of the things that get done in this world get done by busy people. So I decided I had to figure out some way to make it happen. So at age 62, I began a new endeavor as a writer. I'm occasionally asked if I ever get writer's block or feel intimidated. My reply is only when I stop to think about the fact that I'm writing on the pages where Elmer Kelton used to write. If you don't know Elmer Kelton, you just failed Texas history. You need to go find the book, The Time It Never Rained, and you'll understand a whole lot more about conservation. But anyway, I began my feeble attempts to bridge the gap of understanding between agriculture and oil field community. And what an opportunity that's been to abuse and misuse the English language. One recurring subject involves the overlap of livestock operations and oil field activity, and that brings up the subject of gates. In the laws of probability, it is almost certain that if 10 people have access through a gate, then somebody will leave the gate open. You can just be sure that that's going to happen. Now, I'll tell you, there's no reason to worry about whether a truck may run into a gate on your property. It's going to happen, so worrying's not going to help. Just be prepared for it. You can put bold letters on signs. You can put it in the lease agreement. But keeping the gates closed is going to be a problem, especially after the truck hits it and folds it up like an accordion. The best remedy that I've found is to realize that livestock and oil field operations are really not compatible. A significant point of conservation is pasture rotation. Get the livestock out of the pasture before construction starts. Open the gates and tie them back. And if you do that, then please take the sign off that says keep gate closed. Conflict avoidance prevents the need for conflict resolution. If your cows aren't in there or your sheep aren't in there, they will not get run over. I occasionally hear people bring up something on a different subject, and they say that corporations don't care if they contaminate a freshwater zone during a frack job. And they usually continue that rant on for a little bit. And when they run out of breath, I suggest that there's one thing corporations do care about, and that's profit. They won't argue that point. So what has to happen in order for a frack job to contaminate a freshwater zone? That would actually mean that the frack job's a total failure, because you're going into a lower pressure zone where you need to be working in a high pressure zone to make something happen. So if you communicate the fluid that goes to the freshwater zone, you didn't get your frack job done. That means it's a total failure. That means all those guys that worked real hard, a total failure, and maybe a couple of $1 million worth of money, or of the investor's money, went in the wrong place. So they absolutely want to protect the freshwater zone by design. It's not so much that they have this mantra that, oh, we're out here to protect the freshwater zone. If they do their job right, they're going to protect the freshwater zone because they're going to put that frack fluid in the right place. In my attempts to bridge the gap of understanding between agriculture and the oil field, I can provide numerous examples about land use and conservation. But it's easier for me to explain how to drill a horizontal well than it is to convey the meaning of what it means to be drawn to the land in such a way that one feels a physical, psychological, and almost spiritual conviction. A person who lives on property which has been in the family for multiple generations may have what many would consider to be an illogical, emotional attachment to the land. For us, the land is not merely an asset or a possession. It is history. It is part of our being. It may be the culmination of careers which existed on the land. It is the memory of family, friends, and neighbors. It may be a legacy that's handed down, or it may have a history of each generation of ownership struggling to pay off a mortgage. It may provide a sense of home, a sense of belonging, or a comfort zone which defies explanation. For those of us who live on the land that's been in the family for multiple generations, we do not want to answer the question, do you own the land or does the land own you? Maybe that's why people often refer to us as people of the land. Sociologists have varying definitions regarding personal space and how we have a perimeter of slightly more than arm's length within which only a few people are welcome. Anyone who invades that circle creates a degree of discomfort. For people of the land, that personal space extends to the perimeter of their property, whether it's 40 acres or 4,000 acres. While some feel pride of ownership, there are others who feel a sense of responsibility which meets the definition of stewardship. A good steward has the desire to leave the land for the next generation in better condition than he found it. While landowners and energy companies do not have identical goals and objectives, those don't have to be mutually exclusive. Many times, doing the right thing at the right time, whether it is a frack job or a grazing operation, is also a good economic decision. I believe that if we look at our common objectives and focus on being the best that we can be, avoiding conflict and minimizing the impact of our actions, that agriculture and energy projects can coexist. Yes, in my backyard right now. Thank you.
It's gonna be loud. Okay. It's not gonna work. Fun. Okay, good morning. My name is Alex Hettena, and I am the GIS specialist at the Borderlands Research Institute. Can you hear me all right now? Good, great, thank you. So I also work with Billy with our Center for Land Stewardship and Stakeholder Engagement, that mouthful that we've been working on. Thank you for having us here at the summit today. He's really done a great job in my opinion, so thank you. So I'm here to tell you about a new and exciting online mapping tool that was developed by the BRI, by the Borderlands Research Institute, and several of our partners. And it can be used to identify prime areas that are both suitable for energy development and also can hopefully cause the least amount of disturbance to the land, the wildlife, and the humans. The idea for this online mapping tool, that I will refer to as the tool from now on, was born out of the Respect Big Bend effort, primarily from the stakeholder advisory group that Dr. Harvison mentioned earlier. The tool was supported by the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, and the data were compiled from ongoing research projects that we have from the Bureau of Economic Geology, the Nature Conservancy, and at Borderlands Research Institute. So we know West Texas is wonderful for a lot of reasons. The 18 counties that make up this area that we're looking at is special. It's home to the oil and gas-rich Permian Basin, the diverse and wild Chihuahuan Desert, deeply rooted cattle ranching history, and the tough humans that live here, both past and present. One of the main questions that we're trying to address today is how we can continue to produce the energy we need to meet the increasing demand while being mindful of the natural world and all that it offers. So our goal is to advance low-impact energy development that mitigates potential impacts to locally significant ecological and social cultural assets. Now that's a tongue twister for me, but it's a lot to look at. So we're going to break this down into two main pieces. First, let's understand what's important to the community. You've heard about these cumulative values. Again, Dr. Harvison mentioned these earlier. The Stakeholder Advisory Group identified several ecological and social values in the Tri-County region, and that would be Jeff Davis, Presidio, and Brewster counties. We then translated each of the values into a spatial proxy so that the values could be represented and mapped across the study area. For example, in order to map the value hunting and tourism, we used pronghorn herd units, mule deer herd units, recreational trails, and managed areas, and applied that to a map. We then weighted and summed together all of these input values to create a surface of cumulative values across the 18 counties. And this is that final result map that you've seen in a couple presentations now. These cumulative values were grouped into 5 interval classes, with very low being dark purple, medium being light yellow, and very high as dark green. I'd like you to draw your attention to the dark green on the map. Out of the 18 counties that we have, there are about 11 million acres with classes that are rated high and very high, meaning that those 11 million acres are considered important culturally, socially, and/or ecologically. Brewster, Presidio, and Davis counties have some of the largest and most intact landscapes within that area, and so it amounts to about 81%. One more thing. Oh, yeah. Okay. So now we have addressed the first part of our goal, and let's start by looking at the values. And so I'm going to move on now to advancing low impact energy development. Pardon my speaking today. And Dr. Young was referencing this earlier. Our partners at BEG have mapped all existing infrastructure. So that includes gas and oil wells, pipelines, transmission lines, solar facilities, and wind farms. And this is an example of what you would see when using the tool in your browser. You can click through the various tabs on the left and look at the individual values or even the cumulative values by toggling these layers on and off. So I went into the Energy tab and toggled on the existing well pads layer, which populates the map with tiny little black dots. It might be kind of hard to see up there. And then BEG also projected the amount of energy production and estimated locations of new facilities. In this slide right here, I've got the medium impact scenario. That's what Dr. Young was referencing as well. That's the medium impact scenario for oil and gas. And this shows the forecasted placement of well pads, assuming companies continue with today's average of 3 well pads 3 wells per pad, or business as usual. For renewable energy, the dark gray patches on the right, or mostly on the right, I believe, represent existing wind facilities as of 2020. So you can turn on and off these layers and play with it a little bit, but essentially you want to see the existing infrastructure or the projected infrastructure. In the slide, I'm showing the potential wind layer, and this is the area that's considered suitable for wind development. Okay, so for the most useful part of the tool, you can upload or draw in your own shapefile or polygon to get a site-specific breakdown of the value of classes. In this context, a polygon means a fully enclosed area. So as an example, I drew a polygon in the northern part of Brewster County. And the polygon amounts to just over 27,000 acres. Here I included the cumulative values layer to show how the polygon intersected with the class types. I then ran an analysis, and this analysis helped identify areas of high and low impact to help us make siting decisions. And this is essentially where the 2 pieces of our goal are coming together. We're bringing together the cumulative values and the energy impact. Conveniently, the tool also produces a set of results, and each one of these tables tallies up the number of acres within each cumulative value, separated by the proxies and the projected energy types. So I'll explain some of these results because there's a lot going on here. Of the 27,000 acres in that original polygon that I drew, 17,000 acres are ranked as high and very high cumulative value classes. It's about 59%. So these numerical values here offer us a way to describe what percentage of a potential development site has land of low or high value. When looking at potential oil and gas siting options, this location that I chose just happened to be outside of the projected area for new pads, meaning that there's no area within this polygon that is suitable for oil and gas development at this time. And let's look at some of the renewables. I've added a map on the top there with a potential solar layer to show how to interpret these results. Within the polygon, the area in orange is considered suitable for solar facilities, and that amounts to about 7,000 acres. Of those 7,000 acres, reference back to the cumulative values map on the left, and notice where the orange would overlap. And we can see that almost 1,800 acres are considered high and very high cumulative value classes. But we've got 5,000 acres that are of the medium value. Now we'll look at a potential wind layer and where you could build. About 16,000 acres are considered suitable for wind development within that polygon. We also see that there are 8,000 acres, or half of the total potential wind area, that's considered high or very high values. So both the solar and wind examples, for both of these examples, one might use these results to plan sites on land that has lower value classes. And through this analysis, we are able to identify land that may or may not be suitable for development of traditional and renewable energy facilities, while also considering the social and ecological values. And I've been really impressed with this tool. I hope it's something that will be useful for everyone. But we do recognize that there are a couple of drawbacks at the moment. As it stands currently, the tool is static, meaning it is not being updated as new data are becoming available. And currently, the data sets are from 2020. There are also new facilities being built and wells being drilled very regularly. So the projections for energy sites will likely change as we learn about those new sites and as technology advances. At the time, or at this time, the tool does not include any publicly available historical resources or archaeological sites, but we hope to include them in a future version if possible. We recommend using the tool at a medium scale. It does not have the resolution for fine-scale work, nor is it ideal for a project that spans across several counties, but what it can do is provide a bird's-eye view of a potential site and quantify the cumulative values there. It should also be, or it can be considered a first step in making the siting decision. However, as with any model, relying on the tool alone should not be considered a valid substitute for on-the-ground knowledge. So we hope that energy development companies and conservation organizations will consult the tool as they move forward with siting decisions. And as we all know, Texas is over 95% privately owned, and energy development will likely occur on these private lands. And we're hoping that this tool will be helpful for private landowners. The Nature Conservancy laid a really strong foundation for us to work off of, and we plan on building a more dynamic version of this tool in the coming years that will incorporate new and updated data sets as they become available. In the meantime, we hope to launch the tool on the Borderlands Research Institute website in the next couple of months. And if you have any questions about it or would like to talk about this, feel free to reach out to me. I'll have my emails up there. And I would like to thank all of our partners who came up with this tool and turned it into the version that we have today. And I'd like to thank you all.
We have about 10 minutes left. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so this is working? Yes, okay. So the question was if we're going to have any areas that are including mining or being affected by mining? Oh, rare earth elements. So at this time, we don't have any information on that as far as I know. Billy might be able to answer this a little bit better.
It's timely question, something we've been talking about as of late. I'm hopeful that we can potentially incorporate that in the future, but at this time we don't have that. It was the focus was primarily energy and not necessarily mining, though we understand that obviously there's a lot of potential there, and it's something we need to be looking at. So, great question.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Mickey Marcus. I work for SWCA Environmental Consultants, and I had a question primarily for Collin. So my family used to own a native plant nursery, and we always had a problem with supply and demand. And so when I was looking, when I was listening to Michael Young's earlier presentation, and adding up all the numbers, it looks like there's up to 3 million acres of oil and gas, solar, wind projects that are going to need reclamation. And so my question is there a supply for the native seeds, and are people considering contract grow, so as projects go into development, they can contract, the seed that they're going to need for all these multiple acre restoration projects?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Is it, okay, this is working. That's a good question and a really important issue and it's going to be a challenge for the future. We'd actually put together a paper with several of our collaborators at the Bureau of Economic Geology projecting out native seed demand for different energy development scenarios. And in those scenarios, even at kind of a minimal growth scenario, we couldn't meet current demand. You just run into the limitations of production. Producing native seeds is a niche crop species that doesn't translate well to just any general farming operation. It's very difficult to scale up a new operator. It's a totally different type of operation that somebody that's growing corn or rice is just not going to be familiar with there. The different growers that we work with, they have the land that's under their ownership, as well as they do contract with different producers who have a history of seed production with them. The production land holdings that these seed producers that we're working with, some of them have more than doubled their production acreage, but we're still running into supply issues. So I think it's going to be, to address that need, we really are going to need to look at contracting a lot of that material out. The example of that Chinook pipeline project we worked with Enterprise on, just that one project that was, 8,400 acres of planting or something like that, we bought out the entire state seed supply at that moment. As energy development continues, we're certainly going to need more than 8,000 acres worth of seed in inventory to be able to address the needs of those projects. So I think we all understand the importance of the issue. We're trying our best to deal with it, work with the grower community to kind of increase production, but it's not something that you can just turn around real quick. There's a lot of energy and effort and cost to kind of scale that production up. So we're hopeful that in the future we're going to be able to do a better job of addressing that supply issue, but I think it's always going to be an issue for us.
Richard.
Maybe if you could spend just a minute talking to us about conversations that you have with your oil and gas operators about these restoration projects, how those conversations are initiated. Maybe it's all set out ahead of time in your surface use agreement, but talk to us about their eagerness and their willingness to listen and vice versa. Could you do that, please?
Yeah, you bet. So to your point, most of this is specifically laid out in our surface use agreement. But with that being said, we have done along the way numerous provisions to our surface use agreement with new operators and whatnot. So, I think it goes back to, it doesn't hurt to ask, obviously. And there seems to be a bit more willingness with each passing year from these operators. Some are better than others, that's the nature of the beast, obviously, but there's a stronger willingness on their end with each passing year to become more conservation minded, leave it like it was before they got there type of mindset. So it's, most of this is laid out in our surface use agreement, but we've done provisions along the way and have tweaked our surface use agreement to meet certain demands and things that we see need to be differently. And so it's one of the things I've learned working with the various operators we have is there's a it's a give and take to an extent. You have to build a strong working relationship with them. They've got a job to do. You have a job to do as well from a landowner standpoint. So it's there's a give and take there for sure, and understanding that along the way. But I think it all falls back to planning at the beginning and having I hate to keep going back to a strong, to the gentleman's point earlier, a surface use agreement that has some teeth to it, because that sets the guidelines. That's what you operate off of, and that's what helps set the precedent in regards to what you, the landowner, want done on the ground. So.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
My name's Greg Brunson, Rocket 5 Ranch in Loudoun County. I enjoyed Mr. Currie's presentation immensely, and it was very instructional for what we do by way of conserving the land, our stewardship of the land in extreme oil production that we have right on the shale. We're right in the heart of the shale, and we've got a lot of production going on. A couple of things that I thought I might mention that were not mentioned by way of teeth that we talked about, that you referred to. I found over the years of trying to deal with large corporations, particularly majors, that the people that you're dealing with, negotiating with for land surface use, are not people that actually do the construction. And they're in Houston somewhere, and they're agreeable to all kinds of things, and don't know what happens on site. So I started going out and watching drilling procedures, drilling operations, and finding out exactly how much room do you need. I was seeing that people will, like roughnecks and guys and engineers and people on the surface will use as much land as they can, because they want to be comfortable, and they want to use as much as they can, as they can get away with. So we evolved surface use agreements that limit, for example, pads to 4 acres. No more. You get 4 acres, that's the top size pad on our ranch now. We also use the corridors that you mentioned. Mr. Currie, that's right on target. I thought we were the only people that did that. Apparently you're doing it too. Another thing is pipelines, especially the big guys that come in with eminent domain and start pushing you around, tend to want 30-foot pipelines, 30 foot wide, with working space added on another 15 feet. They're talking about putting 45-foot gash across your property, stripping it, and just to put in a little pipeline. And you can severely limit that if you start talking to them about what you know about what it takes. You can limit it with a surface use agreement down to 15 feet. Same with roads. They want 35-foot roads where trucks can pass each other. And you just stipulate 15 feet. Put put little turnouts at the end of your road and take your time. You don't have to pass each other. You wait for the truck to come by and go by it again. So that's what we do, and I thought I'd just mention that for purposes that people could help, could use in the future.
One thing I would like to just elaborate on it just a bit. So he made some very good points, and going back to the pipeline right-of-way space, that's one of the reasons we position a lot of these pipelines and flow lines along existing roads, because they can actually use the existing road as part of their working right-of-way. So that minimizes your pipeline right-of-way as well. And one of the things I didn't specify this, but we try to do is that initial pipeline in that right-of-way, we try to position it to one side or the other of that right-of-way. And what that allows us to do in the future is we can put multiple pipelines or flow lines in the same right-of-way and not need additional space. And lastly, I wanted to just mention this. You can have the best surface use agreement that there is, but if you don't have someone to enforce what is actually on paper on the ground, it will never happen. So I just wanted to point that out.
And very, very quickly before we close this out, and this was something that was extremely important to the Respect Big Bend Steering Committee, and that was landowner energy relations. We didn't always get it right, but it was at the forefront of all of our work. And I wanted to ask Dennis, as someone that's kept a boot in both communities over these years, have you seen an evolution in the relationships, especially between the majors and landowners? And especially, did you get turned off? And no, what I was saying was, as part of our Respect Big Bend Steering Committee, we were very cognizant and really aware of the relationship between landowners and energy developers. And I was asking Dennis, since he did come from the corporate world, he kept a boot in both the ag community and the development community, if he had seen through his career an evolution of those relationships.
I do believe that to some degree the communication has improved. That's one of the things as time goes on. There's more people experienced with technology that do more reading and more studying on things. So I believe that's added a lot to the improvement of communication. And along with that is people are realizing, just as this gentleman said, that the guy they're talking to that's negotiating things is not going to be the one that's there on site looking after things. If it happens, it's a very, very rare event. And you just need to keep that in mind. You're talking to one person, but what counts is that written document, that lease agreement. But I do believe that communication is improving. That's one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing now, is trying to share some information and get that out. But I do believe that people are more aware of it, and major companies especially have been brought into they've got a target on them regarding environmental concerns. So they're very much aware of it. They may pay more lip service to it, because there again you've got one person that's talking up front and other people that are coming along behind to do the work. But it's not there. It's not 100% yet by any means, but I do believe it's getting better.
Improving. I want to thank everybody on the panel. I think our time's done here, and we appreciate everything. Oh.
Post-completion reclamation versus post-production, because there's about a 30-year difference, which takes our 3-acre deal down much quicker.
Yeah, so what he's referring to is let's just I'll just use a 6-well, 4-acre pad for instance. Once those wells have been completed and they're online, you can then get that location down to about 1/3 of an acre. So that is what is left there for the life of those wells, in other words. So you go from 4 acres initially to once those wells are fracked and online, you go to a third of an acre, and that will remain there for the life of those wells until those wells are plugged, so.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate our speakers. One final round of applause for this panel.